Welcome back. The huge procurement blizzard that's coming could force changes in the way agencies buy. A movement is afoot to drive functional collaboration in acquisition. Greg Giddens is partner at Potomac Ridge Consulting, former chief acquisition officer at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Greg, thanks for joining me today. What does the term functional collaboration in acquisition mean?
Good evening, Francis. Thanks for having me. It means really bringing all the key players and stakeholders together. You know, it's somewhat a revitalization of the integrated product teams, or the IPTs. And it's bringing in the mission owners, procurement, logistics, legal, budget, bringing everybody that's got a stake in the program of the acquisition together and to work it in a collective manner. It's really the way to tackle complex problems, and that collaboration can be very powerful.
The cynic in the acquisition community would say, wouldn't that cynic say, Greg, that this is the way we should have been doing it all along, right?
Probably the cynic would say that, but there's no time machine, so there's no better time to start doing the right thing than now. And it is a best practice. If you went online and looked at some of the best practices and even things that we learned through the pandemic, this was again brought out as a best practice where you're bringing the team together. But unfortunately, that's not what a lot of organizations currently do. They operate more in a silo environment.
What of those stakeholders that you mentioned are the ones that are most commonly left out of the process now, in your view, Greg?
Well, I think typically procurement is left out till near the end instead of bringing them in early into the process. I think budget is another organization that really needs to have a seat at the table and to line up what's happening with this acquisition with some of the outcomes and impacts the organization is trying to achieve, and how does the budget support that. Right, if you bring budget into these conversations, you can really then start to have a strategy-driven budget instead of having a budget-driven strategy. And to a degree, industry is somewhat left out because there's a lot of hesitancy still in government agencies to talk to industry. No matter how many Mythbusters OFPP puts out, there's still that big hesitancy, and we need to really bring industry into the mix early.
I want to come back to that if we have time, Greg, because culture, I think, is the biggest driver there. Where is this working well in government now? Are there examples of organizations that are doing this well today?
There are some examples where this is happening. Most of it is somewhat episodic, not really spread across complete agencies. The Intel community is having some success in this, reducing some of their cycle times. FEMA's had some success. DHS at large has had some success, particularly based on the work Soraya and Polly Hall are doing in the Procurement Innovation Lab, and how they're trying to spread this sense of collaboration across the department. General Holt at the Air Force had great success in bringing in this functional collaboration into category management. And the VA is starting to work on doing that as well, but it is still more episodic and not really across kind of the whole agency front.
One of the things you said there sounds, sounds really appealing as a side benefit. You said the intelligence community is reducing cycle times. That's kind of the gold standard. That's what everybody's going for, isn't it, Greg?
Absolutely. This is one of the ways to really do this. You know, typically agencies will look at this in a silo and have part of the organization want to carve off its piece, work it, and then virtually kind of toss it over to the person in the cube. That just really is not how you pull down cycle time. You need to bring everybody in early and together, and almost think about it the same way you would build a house. You bring all the functionals together. You don't build a house only with carpenters. You have carpenters and plumbers, electricians, and they have a plan, they have a blueprint. They all come in and they work to that. They sync up to that, and that's how you're able to pull in and get rid of, in fact, a lot of the scrap and rework, which then lengthens the time frame.
You mentioned the procurement lab at DHS, and Soraya was on the program a couple of weeks ago kind of with an update there. That came to my mind first as you started to describe who all needed to be in the room. What changes this from being more episodic at organizations to being kind of the standard operating procedure?
So Francis, that's really what we need to do. We need to take this best practice and make it a common practice. Too many times we'll study and look at a best practice and list them and post them and go, oh, these are best practices, but they're really not common. And I think some things we need to do, OFPP needs to continue to be a voice and an advocacy for functional collaboration and IPTs. The Chief Acquisition Officers Council, I think, has a role to come with a strong position on this. And Francis, I think it's time to start thinking about mandating training. And there's two great programs out there, the CSAW, the Civilian Services Acquisition Workshop, which really brings in all the stakeholders early, even when the requirements development process is happening. and then maps out a strategy and maps out a roadmap to go forward. And for IT, the digital IT acquisition professional training really is a great way to bring in the community if you have an IT procurement. And in fact, it itself was a collaboration between OFPP and the U.S. Digital Services team.
We have about 30 seconds left, Greg. What will you watch to see whether this idea of functional collaboration really takes hold?
What I'll be looking for is to see leadership really take a strong stand on this. I think there's a lot at the working level that sees the value in this, but they don't see the structure and the process in place to enable this. So again, I think the policy perspective needs to come out and really starts to push for some mandatory training to make sure that teams start off moving in the right direction with all the right people in the right seats on the same bus on the same journey.
Greg Giddens, thanks very much as always.
My pleasure. Thank you.